Hello and welcome. My name is Alan, and we are back with more Greek mythology. Today, we finish part 3. I think it's part 3 of the book. Yeah, part 3, which is chapter 12, Atalanta. This is one of the female heroes of Greek mythology. Let's jump into this. Her story is told in full by the late writers Ovid and Apollodorus, but it is an ode tale, one of the poems ascribed to Hesiod, but probably of a somewhat later date, say the early 17th century, describes the race and the golden apples. And the Iliad gives an account of the Caledonian boar hunt. I have followed in my account Apollodorus, who probably wrote in the 1st or 2nd century AD. Ovid's tale is good only occasionally. He gives a charming picture of Atalanta among the hunters which I have put into my account. But often, as in the description of the boar, he is so exaggerated, he verges on the ridiculous. Apollodorus is not picturesque, but he is never absurd. Sometimes they are said to have been two heroines of that name. Certainly, two men, Iasus and Sconius, are each called the father of Atalanta, but then it often happens in old stories that different names are given to unimportant persons. If there are two Atalantas, it is certainly remarkable that both wanted to sail on the Argo, both took part in the Caledonian boar hunt, both married a man who beat them in a foot race, and both were ultimately changed into lionesses. Since the story of each is practically the same as that of the other, it is the simpler to take it for granted that there was only one. Indeed, it would seem passing the bounds of the probable, even in the mythological stories, to suppose that there were two maidens living at the same time who loved adventure as much as the most dauntless hero, and who would outshoot and outrun and outwrestle too the men of one of the two greatest ages of heroism. Atalanta's father, whatever his name was, when a daughter and not a son was born to him, was of course bitterly disappointed. He decided that she was not worthy bringing up and had the tiny creature left in the wild mountainside to die of cold and hunger. But, as so often happens in stories, animals proved kinder than humans. A she-bear took charge of her, nursed her, and kept her warm, and the baby grew up thus into an active, daring little girl. Kind hunters then found her and took her to live with them. She became in the end more than their equal in all the arduous feats of a hunter's life. Once two centaurs, swifter and stronger by far than any mortal, caught sight of her when she was alone and pursued her. She did not run from them. That would have been folly. She stood still and fitted an arrow to her bow and shot. A second arrow followed. Both centaurs fell, mortally wounded. Then came the famous hunt of the Caledonian boar. This was a terrible creature sent to ravage the country of Caledon by Artemis in order to punish the king Oeneus, because he forgot her when he was sacrificing the first fruits to the gods at the harvest time. The brute devastated the land, destroyed the cattle, killed the men who tried to kill it. Finally, Oeneus called for help upon young heroes assembled, many of whom sailed later on the Argo. With them came, as a matter of course, Atalanta, the pride of the woods of Arcady. We have a description of how she looked when she walked in on that masculine gathering. A shiny buckle clasped her robe at the neck. Her hair was simply dressed, caught up in a knot behind. An ivory quiver hung upon her left shoulder, and in her hand was a bow. Thus was she attired. As for her face, it seemed too maidenly to be that of a boy, or too boyish to be that of a maiden. To one man there, however, she looked lovelier and more desirable than any maiden he had ever seen. Oeneus's son, Meleager, fell in love with her at first sight, but we may be sure Atalanta treated him as a good comrade, not as a possible lover. She had no liking for men except as companions in the hunt, and she was determined never to marry. Some of the heroes resented her presence and felt it beneath them to go hunting with a woman, but Meleager insisted, and they finally gave in to him. It proved well for them that they did, because when they surrounded the boar, the brute rushed upon them so swiftly that it killed 2 men before the others could come to their help. And, what was equally ominous, a 3rd man, well pierced by misdirected javelin. In this confusion of dying men and wildly flying weapons, Atalanta kept her head and wounded the boar. Her arrow was the first to strike it. Meleager then rushed on the wounded creature and stabbed it into the heart. Technically speaking, it was he who killed it, but the honors of the hunt went to Atalanta, and Meleager insisted that they should give her the skin. Strangely enough, this was the cause of his own death. When he was just a week old, the fates had appeared to his mother, Althea, and thrown a log of wood into the fire burning in her chamber. Then, spinning as they ever did, twirling the staff and twisting the thread of destiny, they sang, "To you, O newborn child, we grant a gift, to live until this wood turns into ash." Althea snatched the brand from the fire, quenched the flame, and hid it in a chest. Her brothers were among those who went to hunt the boar. They felt themselves insulted and were furiously angry at having the prize go to a girl, as no doubt was the case with others. But they were Meleager's uncles and did not need to stand on any ceremony with him. They declared that Atalanta should not have the skin, and told Meleager that he had no more right to give it away than anyone else had. Whereupon Meleager killed them both, taking them completely off their guard. This news was brought to Althea. Her beloved brothers had been slain by her son because he had made a fool of himself over a shameless hussy who went hunting with men. A passion of rage took possession of her. She rushed to the chest for the brand and threw it into the fire. As it blazed up, Meleager fell to the ground dying, and by the time it was consumed, his spirit had slipped away from his body. It is said that Althea, horror-stricken by what she had done, hanged herself, so the Caledonian boar hunt ended in tragedy. To Atalanta, however, it was only the beginning of her adventures. Some say that she sailed with the Argonauts. Others that Jason persuaded her not to do so. She is never mentioned in the story of their exploits, and she was certainly not one to hold back when deeds of daring were to be done, so that it seems probable that she did not go. The next time we hear of her is after the Argonauts returned, when Medea had killed Jason's uncle Peleus under the protest of restoring him to youth. At the funeral games held in his honor, Atalanta appeared among the contestants, and in the wrestling match conquered the young man who was to be the father of Achilles, the great hero Peleus. It was after this achievement that she discovered who her parents were and went to live with them, her father apparently having reconciled to having a daughter who really seemed almost, if not quite as good, as a son. It seems odd that a number of men wanted to marry her because she could hunt and shoot and wrestle, but it was so. She had a great many suitors. As a way of disposing of them easily and agreeably, she declared that she would marry whoever could beat her in a foot race, knowing well that there was no such man alive. She had a delightful time. Fleet-footed young men were always arriving to race with her, and she always outran them. But at last one came who used his head as well as his heels. He knew he was not as good a runner as she, but he had a plan. By the favor of Aphrodite, always on the lookout to subdue wild young maidens who despised love, this ingenious young man, whose name was either Melanion or Hippomenes, got possession of 3 wondrous apples, all of pure gold, beautiful as those that grew in the garden of the Hesperides. No one alive could see them and not want them. On the race course, as Atalanta poised for the starting signal, and 100-fold more lovely disrobed than her garments, with her garments on. On the race course, as Atalanta poised for the starting signal, and 100-fold more lovely disrobed than with her garments on, looked fiercely around her. Wonder at her beauty took hold of all who saw her, but most of all the man who was waiting to run against her. He kept his head, however, and held fast to his golden apples. They started, she flying swift as an arrow, her hair tossed back over her white shoulders, a rosy flush tinging her fair body. She was outstripping him when he rode one of the apples directly in front of her. It needed but a moment for her to stoop and pick the lovely thing up, but that brief pause brought him abreast of her. A moment more and he threw the second, this time a little to the side. She had to swerve to reach it, and he got ahead of her. Almost at once, however, she had caught up with him, and the goal was now very near. But then the third golden sphere flashed across her path and rode far into the grass beside the course. She saw the gleam through the green. She could not resist it. As she picked the apple up, her lover, panting and almost winded, touched the goal. She was his. Her free days alone in the forest and her athletic victories were over. The two are said to have been turned into lions because of some affront offered either to Zeus or to Aphrodite. But before that, Atalanta had borne a son, Parthenopaeus, who was one of the 7 against Thebes. So yeah. We get a good look at the tale of, well, the tales of Atalanta, who was as great a hero in Greek mythology as almost any other, except for the fact she was female. Most of the heroics of ancient Greece are often saw as men. Excuse me, my goodness. But, yeah. It is interesting because she is one of these underappreciated heroes. I mean, there's always been, for some people, that, oh, men should always be best, be better, you know. But Atalanta often showed she was just as good as any other guy. And still had amazing beauty. So, I mean, it's it's nice to see that there was even female heroes. So, but in the next episode, I believe it said we are going on to into the Trojan War. So, yeah. I think that's what it said. I've already forgot what it said. But, yeah, part 4. Yeah, Trojan War. I actually do have to have this thick book that's all about the two known books of the Trojan War, the Iliad and the Odyssey. The Iliad being the war itself, and then the Odyssey, the story of Odysseus and his crew trying to return home. So yeah, but we'll be reading from this because, I mean, that's what we're doing. We're reading this. But yeah, part 4, Trojan War. The Adventures of Odysseus. Quite some length on that. The Adventures of Aeneas. Now remember, when we read upon Norse mythology, it was supposedly connected to the Trojan War. Then we get into part 5, the House of Atreus. The great families of mythology. Which is interesting. Yeah. A lot of your Greek heroes will have their own lineages where it's not just them that is great, but others. The Royal House of Thebes. The Royal House of Athens. And Midas and others. So yeah, we've still got a ways, but it gives us a good look into all of Greek mythology. Like I said, I like the book. I think it does well as a great introduction to anyone wanting to know more of Greek mythology. But we'll end this episode there. As always, educate thyself. Think, read, study, learn. Someone tells you something you have trouble believing, ask them to cite their sources. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you all in the next one. Until then, later.